Today we're going to hear about the new Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. I've entitled the message, "What is Life Without Purpose?" We've now finished Bereshit and we're beginning the amazing story of the Exodus. Joseph had made his brothers swear that they would take his bones out of Egypt and bury him in Canaan like their father Jacob. But unlike Jacob, whose sons buried him in Machpelah just 70 days after his death, it would take at least 2 more generations before Joseph's wish could be fulfilled. Even his brothers had all died in Egypt. So how did their descendants know that they had to do that? Well, as we read in many native customs, many native traditions, stories are passed down by word of mouth, maybe around campfires or however it was done. But these stories were passed down from generation to generation so that the children would know what their ancestors told them. But what happens when the next generation doesn't hear the story of their ancestors? It's so important for you and I. We have the obligation to share the wisdom that we learned from our predecessors, so that as our rabbi spoke in his message last week, we can learn from their messages, from their mistakes, and benefit from their wisdom. But how can we recognize the wisdom that is worthy to pass on to the next generation? Most of our inner struggles stem from what we were or weren't taught when we were growing up, simply because our parents weren't taught. They had the same problem. Their parents weren't taught. But this is where the beauty of the Torah comes in. The Torah is a book containing the stories that Moses wrote down from the heart of our Creator so that we could learn how to live a meaningful life. It teaches us the value of learning from those who came before us. It teaches us about our role, our purpose, our place in the grand scheme of things. And without it, there's a hole in our soul that can never properly be filled. Sadly, the written Torah, and I'm not speaking about the oral Torah, the written Torah has, for the most part, been abandoned because mankind prefers its own brand of wisdom and has thrown out the God who gave us this wisdom. We don't have to look far to see where that's getting us. But as the second commandment states, God opens the hearts and the spiritual eyes of the third and fourth generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. And then we are blessed for the up to the 1,000th generation, which means eternally. So we go to 3 or 4 generations that do not know him. And then it switches. And it's a cycle. This cycle of forgetting and returning to him will be depicted here in the story of the Exodus. And we begin here in Parashat Shemot. And we read about the many women who unwittingly found their purpose, no matter how insignificant their role may have seemed, not only to them, but to others at the time. There were 2 Hebrew women, midwives, Shifra and Puah, and they went against the king of Egypt, who ordered them to kill all the male Hebrew newborn babies. They didn't know that their courage would be rewarded. They didn't know that God would deal well with them. And it says he built them houses. Another woman, a mother, who had the courage to save her chosen son from this reign of terror, she hid him in a basket in the reeds and sent her daughter, or the baby's sister Miriam, another brave little warrior, a little soldier, to watch what would happen to him. Then another woman, the daughter of this merciless king, chose to take a stand against the evil intent of her father. She saved this special Hebrew boy, and she was given the privilege of naming him. She chose the name Moses, which signifies being drawn out of the Nile, while his Hebrew name, Moshe, means savior, deliverer, Moshiach. She didn't know what lay in his future, or that he would be the instrument to bring about the devastation of her own people. Our brave young warrior Miriam somehow mustered the courage to ask the king's daughter if she should find someone to nurse this boy. The reward for her bravery was that not only did her mother get to raise her own child until he was weaned, but she was also paid for it. It's a marvel to see how our loving God works in our lives. These women had no special power, yet something within them guided them to stand up strong against the tyranny brought about by the most powerful leaders of their day. They weren't asked to do anything more than the simple tasks laid before them in order to fulfill their small roles. Next in the saga of Moses appear 7 more women, the daughters of the priest of Midian. They were at the well watering their father's sheep. But when they were there, they were driven off by the male shepherds. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we see Moses, who had been resting there after he fled from Pharaoh. He rose to their defense and he watered their sheep. But then the girls left and went home, and their father questioned them about how they could have returned home so quickly. He obviously knew the daily battles they had to face as female shepherds. But he may not have had any choice, since we don't read that he had any sons. When they told him the story about this brave Egyptian who had saved them, their father admonished them for not at least having invited him home for a meal. You know, sometimes we wonder why we didn't do the right things in certain situations, but here again, our Torah shows us how very human we are. Next, we read that Moshe was content to be sheltered in the home of the priest of Midian. He had previously led a very sheltered life in the palace of Pharaoh before he was forced to flee. So now, at the age of 80, Moses would learn what it meant to step out of his sheltered life and enter the role of deliverer assigned to him by the Creator. He couldn't have done it without the small part that all those people played, from the midwives in Egypt to the Egyptian taskmaster who beat the slave, the Hebrew slave, up to the priest of Midian and his daughters. None of them would have recognized that their small roles in God's plan would lead to the great role assigned to Moshe. You and I have the privilege of reading these stories, and they can help us in the search for our roles and to help us to accept them. Now the stage was set for the miracle of miracles to take place: freedom from slavery. This was important enough to be named in the very first commandment, where it says, "I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of slavery." You know, the cry for freedom lies in the soul of every human being. Although freedom to be ourselves is the cry that every group is shouting for, freedom comes at a great cost and holds a tremendous responsibility to those who want to be set free. The children of Israel and the people of Egypt were about to learn that cost. Every generation to follow would have to learn that true freedom can only be attained under the leadership of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moshe's God. We can use the gift of free will to choose to do the right or the wrong things. But the freedom that chooses to do evil can only bring about disaster, not only for themselves, but for humanity, all those around them. And that's what the world is facing now. The formula for the freedom to choose well lies in the Torah. and it's for all mankind. It wasn't only for us. And God tells us that we have no right to add to it or to change it. But that is exactly what we have done. Moshe, in charge of Jethro's flock, was led to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there an angel of the Most High God appeared to him out of a burning bush. You know, the name Sinai came from this bush called Sene Alexandrina. It was a red bush that was combustible. And we still see that in that part of the world today. When God saw that Moshe didn't run away in fear as he had done before, but rather he approached the bush out of curiosity, God called out to him, Moshe, Moshe. Moshe responded with that famous word, Hineni, here I am. How many of us have cried out for justice with an impassioned Hineni, use me, Lord. But when the going gets tough and fear rises up in us, how quickly our cry of Hineni is stifled. But this time, Moshe didn't run away as he had when trying to save the Hebrew people on his own. That's the key. We have to learn that we don't have to do things on our own. That's one of the secrets to living a life of purpose and courage. In fact, we can't do them on our own. Isn't the mother of fear the sense that we have been abandoned? That we're not safe and protected in this world? That there's no one out there to listen to our deep cries of desperation? That's the root of anxiety, of the anxiety that surrounds us these days. God was now in the process of forming a nation. This nation would be protected by him, and that would ensure that no one who belonged to this nation would ever be alone. That everyone who lived within it would have a role, a life filled with purpose. But those on the outside would live with isolation and abandonment. Do you ever wonder what your purpose is in the grand scheme of things? Especially during these times when there are so many more problems than solutions. When we examine the life of the midwives who lied to save the Hebrew boys, Miriam's mother who hid her son and who told Miriam to watch out for him, or the Pharaoh's daughter who rescued and named the boy, it's like watching the unfolding of a miraculous drama in which no one could have known the outcome. But we can know that this great orchestra leader, the God of Israel, knows everything from beginning to end. He knows the role that he has prepared for us and what we have to do and what we would have to go through in order to find it. Moshe's old fear of rejection by the people caused him to ask, "Who shall I say sent me?" That's when God says to him, "Tell them, Echye Asher Achye sent you." He knew that he alone could not be a spokesman to his people for God. There's a book that I've read by Uriel ben Mordechai called "If: The End of a Messianic Lie." And in it, Uri helps us to understand this expression, Echye Asher Echye. He says that Echye is a simple Hebrew word that conjugates the verb to be into the first person future. In biblical Hebrew, the future tense more accurately combines the past and the present, making it an action that is ongoing. So Echye is best translated as I shall always be. He emphasized that it does not mean I am that I am, but rather it projects God's existence into the future. I will always be the one who is. This is at the heart of biblical Judaism. He is the only God who was, who is, and who will always be. There is no other God for Israel or for the rest of the nations. This God is the one who walks through our lives with us. He is our protector. He is the one who has prepared our role for us, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem to us, or even to those around us. No matter how much faith we may demonstrate to others, there are aspects of our character that force us to question, do we really trust God, especially when we see what's going on in the world? That's when we need to stop, to search within, and to remind ourselves of what we already know about God from these stories in the Torah, as well as what He's done, as well as in the experience of our own lives. Unlike the magic of how our rabbi used to say, easy believism, that religions promise, ours is a lifetime journey of upward and downward spiraling. During the downtimes, if we can just hold on to the memory of the ups, we will make it through. The downtimes are occasions for teaching us and humbling us. These stories in the Torah are about our ancestors who experienced these important lessons, and we can benefit from their mistakes and their victories. And even if we are not native-born Israelites, and who knows how many of us are, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is ours. He belongs to all of us, Jew and non-Jew. And if we can just remember that the God of Israel is always in control, especially during the times when the earthly kings, from the Pharaoh of Egypt to the modern day self-proclaimed rulers who boast of their godlike solutions to the problems that they created, we will make it through. We simply need to hold on to God and to each other when the times are rough, knowing that we are not alone, that smoother days lie ahead, and from the smallest of us to the greatest, we all have a purpose. Shabbat Shalom.